Peace, brother Kurt. Okay, okay. My mic working. Cool, cool, cool. All right, give me a second. We're about to get it in. We're gonna get it in. You know, the Mossi Warriors having a big day today. Classes of Breads dropped a heck of a presentation on YouTube. If you have not watched it, please go watch Classes Shabazz presentation on Mansa Musa. The brother did an excellent job using excellent sources, letting the information speak for itself. He didn't regurgitate much. He just look. I'm gonna let the information speak. He didn't put no spin on it. None of that. He didn't cut it. He just delivered the truth like he always do. So shout out to Class of Shabazz. Hotep Sinet. I see Mo in the building. We're gonna get it in, y'all. Give me a second. I want to get this off my chest. Now, originally, this presentation was going to go in a whole nother direction. But because it was so much information and I still got to go through so much more information, I decided to put something out for the people to ponder on. And then when I come back, we'll pick up right where we leave off. Now, I intentionally did not incorporate a particular person that you'll see. When I go through this information, I'm not even going to say their name or none of that. But I did not incorporate this particular person because that deserves its own understanding and research and information brought out that'll take us into another direction. So hopefully the people that are tuned into this will watch it. I want to go ahead and say this for everybody that is listening and tuned in. Pray for my sister, Patrice. She like a sister. You know what I'm saying? She family. So pray for her right now. She needs your prayers, and I'm gonna leave it right there. Just keep her in your mind and your thoughts. So without further ado, we're gonna get into this thing right now. Long as I can be heard clear. If I get static, let me know. Restart. Let's go to war. There is no greater dictum than remember the past. From the past, we know what we fight today. We know what we once represented. We know what we once worth. We know what we once had, and know what we now do not have, and what must be done to take charge of our lives again. By the time ship designers and saggers were ready to launch the caravel, Henry had come out of the doldrums caused by his brother Fernando's imprisonment and returned to his quest to sail under Africa. He hoped at least to find a river of gold and press to John. Unfortunately, his explorers were more interested in the African slave business. For those that do not know what doldrum means, you can look up the definition, but it just means stagnant, no growth, on pause. Okay, so Henry went into a phase of no action. He didn't want to involve himself into anything. All right, because of the imprisonment of his brother. I've been there before, where you feel like you imprison yourself when they take your brother. But anyway, let's move on. So here's an imagery of the actual Portuguese ships who set sail toward the continent of Africa. It's just some imagery, nothing special. The Portuguese were just learning about the Arabian slave trading business. They had learned that the Negro Africans came from a place farther south in Africa than the Portuguese had yet sailed. They learned that Arab traders liked the Negroes better than the Tuaregs and Berbers from the north because they were more docile and willing to work. The Portuguese, influenced and motivated by the idea of gold, had other things on their mind when Africa became a primary focus. Prince Henry, after hearing rumors, needed help, so he set out to focus on 5 things: the geography of Western Africa, how to reach the Indies, how the Arabic trade routes function, the source of the gold transported by the caravans to the markets in Cairo and Fez, South of Kuta, and how to find Prester John. For everybody paying attention right now, please remember these 5 key facts. We're not going to deal with all of these things that Prince Henry is out to do, but along this presentation, we will cover a few in particular areas intentionally. One you can go ahead and mark off right now. I'm not going to bring out the trade routes, although I'm a hint toward it. I might, you never know. Here's some other imagery from that same picture, just a different angle. The Portuguese ships. Now, a lot of people talk about where the ships when the slave trade happened. I put a post up the other day that really only got about 7 likes, and that's absolutely fine. I don't do this for attention. I don't do this for likes. I do this to educate the babies and to inform those who are looking for more information to better help themselves along in their development and research. However, the Portuguese were the best shipbuilders in the world. They were the first to do it, big time. Once they learned how to set sail, maneuver against the currents and get themselves going back in the directions they needed to do, it was big business for the Portuguese. Very early in the morning, because of the heat, a few Portuguese seamen on the decks of a half-dozen 100-ton caravels, the new sailing ships, were preparing on August 8, 1444, to land their African cargo near Lagos on the southwest point of Algarve in Portugal. This cargo consisted of 235 slaves. On arriving on the mainland, these people were placed in the field. This comes from the chronicler himself, Zarara. If you know anything about chroniclers, they actually documented history as they were a part of it. They were primary sources to the information distributed because they documented it. Similar to what let's say ancient Kemet, you would have scribes. Chroniclers and scribes go hand in hand. They documented history as it said through their eyes. Okay, so this is a primary quote of what happened. Now, it's not talking about at this particular time in the 1400s. It's not a large number of people that they were enslaving. They were very minimum at best earlier on because they did not have, they did not equip the ships yet to fit more bodies in them. Most of the captives of 1444 had been taken by the Portuguese in a village where they, the Portuguese, shouted out St. James, St. George, and Portugal, at once attacked them, killing and taking all they could. Then might you see mothers forsaking their children and husbands their wives, each striving to escape as best they could. Some drowned themselves in water. Others thought to escape by hiding under their huts. Others stole their children among the seaweed where our men found them afterwards. Notice what he says, where our men found them afterwards. This venture was the first real venture into West Africa led by Le Corante de Freitas. Band of captives driven into slavery. As you can see, just from the artistic expression, this really actually took place. If they had cell phone, camera phones at this particular time, they would have been bold enough to do like they're doing in Libya, pulling out their cell phones, showing how they done rounded up Africans and have them walking back to these ships where they don't know where they're going next. This morning, after the slaves arrived in Lagos, still weak from the voyage, the traders lined them up to be distributed equally among the company's investors. Henry was to receive a fifth of the cargo, mounted on a powerful horse and accompanied by his retinue. He watched the proceedings, cocky as he is, sitting there like he really accomplished something, while all these people gathered around these people, still in tears, sweating, bleeding probably. Man, stuff all over them, not knowing what's going to happen. Some of the slaves kept their heads low, their faces bathed in tears. Some groaned grievously and looked up pleading to their God in the heavens. Others threw themselves to the ground. During the division, fathers were parted from sons, husbands, wives, and brothers from brothers. Having no need of slaves himself, Henry distributed his allotment of the rich people among his retinue. Invasion. The forceful elimination of host populations by attacking populations is not new in the world history. Neither does any race have a monopoly. Conquest is not innate. This is learned over centuries of adaptation and survival. This comes out of a book where, you know, people are supposedly praising or worshiping the Portuguese as they are handling business, making trading deals, and so forth. Irrelevant. In his description of the sale of slaves at Lagos in 1444, Zarara, the court chronicler, was writing of what once seemed a turning point in history. Yet few occurrences does name remain so after scrutiny, and the Portuguese, along with all Southern Europeans of that time, were accustomed both to slaves and to slavery. Peep game. The Mediterranean was the scene of bitter rivalry between, on the one hand, Spain, Portugal, France, and Muslim North Africa, and the Ottoman Empire, which was becoming even more influential. During this rivalry, Portuguese ended up dominating the area near Morocco, and this would give them access to what would later be important real estate when it came to trade routes and access to a later discovery in gold and kidnapped victims. Remember the 5 things that I told you that Prince Henry focused on. I have now mentioned one of those, well, actually a couple of those things, but I did mention that he was very interested in trade routes. Once he captured Morocco, he got his trade routes. So he knew exactly where he could find out the routes going from West Africa to Cairo. That was important for the Portuguese. Here's another imagery of a particular Portuguese in slavery and how, you know, they just did whatever they wanted to do, especially on them ships. Nothing you could do. You're in bondage. You can fight for your life, sink, swim, whatever you want to do. Throughout the 15th and the early 16th century, Portuguese established numerous trading posts on the West African coast and made the coastal population and its rulers participate in trade with Europeans. Prior to the arrival of the Portuguese, Muslim influence dominated trade routes and access to gold and slaves. So the taking of Morocco real estate was essential in the Portuguese monopoly. The Portuguese, already familiar with black slaves since the mid-1200s, especially with the people of Guinea, knew what to expect. They had a great idea as they entered the coast of West Africa. Moorish traders at the time had already been selling Africans to the Portuguese at fairs in Guimarães in northern Portugal. But during this time, the primary focus was not on human cargo, it was on gold. Portuguese was initially attracted to black Africa by its gold, which had previously been exported to the Islamic countries. However, they soon discovered a second African product attractive to Europeans, namely slaves. The Portuguese benefited from trade with the European by selling kidnapped victims from West Africa, mainly people from Senegambia. Remember, I told you that Senegal is the key focus in your research for the slave trade. From 1444 onwards, Zarara's history mentions in every chapter kidnapping of more and more Africans by Portuguese captains in even more southern latitudes. The technique of these captures was inherited from attacks on Moors in Portugal or in Spain. There was little innovative about it, for this side of the African adventure had not been foreseen by those who began it. They used the same routine over and over, and it kept reproducing in their favor. Slave caravan, as usual. The seizure of these desirable African slaves did not delay scientific discovery for their exploration financially worthwhile. Thus, in 1444, Dinis Diaz, a new captain with imagination, discovered the Senegal, the first great tropical river to be found by Europeans as yet, and by far the biggest which the Portuguese had encountered since leaving the Mediterranean. It was a waterway leading to, for it flowed directly from the richest of the West Coast gold fields, whence the silent trade in gold was carried. Silent trade in gold was carried. While Diaz was out to discover the rest of West Africa, he could later find Cape Verde and Gorée Island. It is here he realized that the coastline of West Africa started to bend east. By this time, Africans had caught wind of kidnapping the Portuguese had been doing and defended themselves from being kidnapped. One of Prince Henry's protégés, Gonçalo de Sintra, who had been his stirrup boy, lost his life looking for slaves on one of these expeditions, as did one of the pioneers of early days, Nuno Tristão. So, when Diaz set out to discover the curve in the continent and other areas of West Africa, of course, by now, because they were rounding up. Now, they were not purchasing anybody. They were literally jack move kidnapping, okay? They were setting people up, all right? Like full jack move style. They get down and lay down, catch you out your sleep, catch you going to bathe, catch you trying to feed your kids. They just running up on you and they would take you. They was not bargaining with nobody at this time. It was straight up jack move. Word had got out, as you see me, what I just read. So when the word got out, the Africans learned how to maneuver themselves in these little canoe boats that they had so that they can escape the Portuguese. And then it was then that they learned how to defend themselves and they started killing the Portuguese. So when people tell you that they weren't fighting, they were fighting. Now watch what happened. Another image right here, slave caravan, pretty much. The Portuguese soon began to buy rather than kidnap slaves. A captain named Jorge Fernandez apparently initiated this change on the explicit orders of Prince Henry. This negotiated change came about in temporary exchange for an old leader of the region. Fernandez would stay in Africa for about a year, which he would gain influence of the people and learn about markets where both slaves and gold might be exchanged. Now, I told you, when we start fighting back, they start trying to negotiate differently. Now, this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because the Portuguese preyed on us. By 1448, about 1,000 slaves had been carried back to the seas of Portugal or to the Portuguese islands, the Azores and the Madeira. Most had been procured by privately financed expeditions, one or two by the Ganos, such as Laco Casano, the earliest example of the non-Portuguese and Atlantic slave trade, who set himself up on the island of Terceira, I don't know how to say it, but Terceira in the Azores. To serve the traffic, a castle as well as trading post was being built on the biggest island in the Bay of Argoon. It was finished in 1461. Slave caravans again. This actually is an imagery of an actual port. Notice in this artistry, did you see the Africans playing the drums? You see animals. You know, you see all of these things going on in this particular area. This is actually an image out of a fort, so they say. But if you take a look at the Africans who are smaller than this guy in the background with all this look like fur or leopard or cheetah on, and he just so looks to you know, oversee them. But if you're not paying too much attention, he's actually riding a horse. It should, however, be added that black slaves appeared in Europe at a time when the trade in white slaves from the Black Sea area was almost at an end, and that from this time slave and Negro became interchangeable terms. I'm going to repeat that for the people who don't pay attention. I said at the end of the trade, well, at the end of the trade of whites from the Black Sea area, and then the primary focus began to be on Africans, the term Negro became slave and Negro became an interchangeable term. By the early 14th century, Negro slaves began to appear in Europe, first as captive and cross, Mediterranean warfare, and later by purchase from North Africa. When in 1453 Constantinople fell to the Turks, the Black Sea slave trade was cut off, and Africa became the only external source of forced labor for the Mediterranean slave plantations. Big things have small beginnings. Remember that little small number that I gave you at the beginning? It increased over time. The attitude of the Africans to transactions of this kind with the Europeans can only be guessed. The sale by any rule of a person of his own people would have been looked on as severe punishment. When the African kinds or other sold prisoners of war, they looked on the persons concerned as aliens, about whose destiny they did not care and whom they might hate. Let me go back real quick before I continue. When you hear the word alien to an African, it simply means someone that is a foreigner, someone of an outside influence that is not who they know. So if these people did not look like the people in our area, we called them aliens, mainly the Europeans and even the Arabs, until they started mixing in so much that we couldn't distinguish the difference. Now, for there was no sense of kinship between different African peoples. Such prisoners, however obtained, were the lowest people in society, and even in Africa, would have been used to do heavy work, including in gold mines. Now, basically, this is setting you up to say, when things transpired, other Africans did participate under the gist of a punishment or a tribal dispute. So when people say Africans sold other Africans, yes, the conditions and circumstances forced their hands to do so. But the people that I'm selling is not my brother or my sister. It's my enemy. It's my friend's enemy. So, but they did not know what they were selling them into, yes. We can attest to that earlier on. In the 15th century, Portuguese benefited from this understanding, which led to regular purchases of kidnapped victims from West Africa. So they're taking advantage of our ignorance because they know that we don't know. Tribal disputes are as ancient in Africa as its early history known to man. And to settle many tribal issues, it was just easy to sell off captives in exchange for much wanted resources. Ignorant to the fact of what would become of those sold off, not many seemed to care. Here we go again, tearing a mother from her babies by force or choice. During the period of the Crusades, Europeans methodically established sugarcane plantations in the eastern Mediterranean long before they seized the Atlantic islands off the coast of North Africa. So they are already setting up sugarcane plantations in the Mediterranean area. How'd that go? African slaves began to perform many functions in Portugal. They became ferrymen in Lisbon and other cities, or were hired out of heavy physical labor as stevedores or builders in hospitals and monasteries. Some slaves were to be found in sugar plantations, though these were not very successful in Portugal. The cane took too much richness from the soil, and planting could not be repeated. Slaves were sometimes also employed as interpreters in Lisbon and on ships going to Africa, in theory at least. When one of these slaves secured 4 slaves for his owner, he would be given his freedom. I just mentioned sugar plantation failure in Portugal because they couldn't repeat it. From an agricultural perspective, if you ever see me do anything on black rice, I did a presentation on that before, and it talks about how the African cultivated rice was cultivating rice long before there was a foreign rice outside. So these people were already good at this. True story. In the MBK, I always said they were getting people from specific areas to do certain jobs because they knew that these people in certain particular areas along the west coast of Africa were great at doing certain things. So when they would get them, it would be easier for them to adapt to a certain job without pay, of course. Once the Portuguese made use of the enslaved Africans, they began to set out and explore more territory for them to capture, then sell and profit from the labor of the enslaved African. They began to seek territories that could supply them with a large number of slaves. This was the basis for Portuguese penetration in the Congo, which began in the early 16th century, and their subsequent conquest of Angola. Captives. But look who's near them. Their own brother. On guard. 22 people were sleeping. I heard them as if they had been cattle towards the boats. Diego Gomez in 1460 on the River Gambia. Direct quote. Primary. In 1458, meantime, Prince Henry had dispatched Diego Gomez with 3 caravels to negotiate treaties with Africans. His mission was to assure the rulers that the Portuguese would henceforth not steal slaves nor anything else on a regular basis, but would barter for them like honest men. Honest men, y'all. He was also to arrange for visits from Africans to Portugal. Gomez made his way even farther up the Gambia than his predecessors had done, as far as then the legendary market city of Cantor, 200 miles from the sea, completely under Songhai rule. What led Gomez in the direction was the amount of quality gold which could be in the area, but what ended up happening was a full-fledged jack move. He took back with him people he had kidnapped along with others who followed along for the journey. When he returned back to Lagos, it is said that the king rejoiced with him. This is a fort off the coast. You see a British-style flag flying. No words, it's just imagery. Every time the Portuguese would make it further into the interior of Africa, a new exploration would follow. In 1460, the Portuguese had discovered Sierra Leone, which led them to acquire gold, Africans, and spices. The Portuguese would make progress and discover more land in Africa. In the midst of this search for Prester John, they focused on agriculture, which is in part brought forth more profits. One consequence of importing these slaves was to inspire the Canary Islands to grow sugar, much as Madeira had done, especially in Tenerife. capital being contributed not only by Canales and the Portuguese, but also by German bankers such as the Wesley of Augsburg. The first sugar mill was set up in 1484. The island began to produce as much sugar as Madeira in the early 16th century, and African slaves were soon used there on a large scale. In the decades immediately after 15, Portuguese capitalists began sugar planting on the island of Sao Tome in the Gulf of Guinea, taking advantage of cheap slave labor available on the nearby African coast to counterbalance the long sea route to the European markets. Here, for the first time, the plantation system depended solely on imported African slave labor, although most of the slaves came from the region near the Congo mouth rather than from the west. More captives on the journey, as usual. This is a routine. From 1503 to 1508, the Portuguese built more trading posts on the coast of West Africa. As the wealth increased for the Portuguese, the Spanish would later enter West Africa. They had trouble establishing themselves. The Portuguese clearly had cornered the market as this capitalist vulture preyed on West Africa. All the black slaves traded in Portugal, Spain, and Africa were regarded then as just one more form of commodity, and though prized, not especially unusual one. Treaties had by then been established with most of the kings or other leaders on the West African littoral, to whom a succession of Portuguese monarchs would regularly send presents. Portuguese merchants made substantial profits from the slave trade, and though the details are missing, in 1488, King Gio told Pope Innocent VIII, the Genoese Giovanni Cibo, that the profits from the slave trade were helping to finance the wars against Islam in North America. Sorry. It's supposed to be Africa. Portuguese preyed on West Africa for as long as it could until the mid-1500s, when the arrival of new European powers entered the coastlines. It is here we see the presence of Portuguese diminish but not ultimately disappear. So mind you, for a long stretch, the rise of Portugal started in the 11th century. It carried over into the 15th century and a little bit longer. Up until the mid-15th century, we don't see other people coming in. We see Spain try to come in. We see Europe began buying a little bit more than they were before. They really didn't have a use for them earlier on because they still were enslaving each other. You know, the term slave come from Slav, which is up there in their area, and those people are used to being enslaved. So they didn't look down on this particular situation. It wasn't no frowned upon situation at all. Before I end this particular presentation, I do like to thank everybody for tuning in. And before I play this video and show my references, I will appreciate any information that anybody wants to add to this particular bill, if you have it. But what I dealt with was a bunch of accounts from chroniclers that actually are providing first-hand information. We call that primary source. And what happened to us is terrible. So I did not mention Christopher Columbus for this particular reason. I skipped over Christopher Columbus because I feel like he actually may deserve his own presentation somewhere down the line. But I don't want to spend my time researching this particular person and then bringing out that information. So what I did was I brought the Portuguese out because in my research over the last 6-7 months, reading these books, you know, and studying this stuff, I continue to see the Portuguese. I followed these guys from the west coast of the continent, from the northwest coast of the continent, all the way down the Atlantic until it bent and turned into the Indian Ocean. On up to the Horn of Africa, the Portuguese. That's how far they had penetrated if we just did it from the outskirts. But they also knew that they had to get deeper into Africa because they had the Dutch, the French, the Europeans. They still were dealing with the Muslims. They had all these people that were fighting over territory. Now, it is then when they penetrate further and they start opening up these plantations that things get interesting. Because these people that like to, with these big imaginations, start setting sail to go to other areas in the world and find land to populate, take over, and run. It is here where we start to see these new ships from the Portuguese area with the technology to sail back north with no problem in winds that blow in all directions. Earlier on, they had a problem with the winds coming to the continent was not coming to West Africa was not a problem for the Portuguese. Getting back was the problem, because when they went back north, back toward Portugal, the winds were so strong in all the directions it would blow them off coast. So the engineers set out to fight against those winds, and when they did, they fixed the sails where they could adjust the sails, and they would poof take them right back quickly, because at first they traveled slowly back north so that they can fight against. Now people are going to ask, where are the ships? Start with the Portuguese. They were the first shipbuilders. You can find ships right now here in Americas. There's one in Baltimore right now that they deemed they made a statue out of it, a tourist site, an attraction, right off the harbor. Dr. Ma'at can walk right up to it if she wants to and walk through it. Others were sunk at the bottom of oceans. Some have been found, damaged, destructed. We have evidence of things all over. People just don't like to read. So hopefully you enjoyed this presentation. As I wrap this up, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Chief X, man, I appreciate it. Kofi, I appreciate it. Mossi Warriors, I appreciate it. Garfield, I appreciate it again. Everybody, the Antpool, everybody, man, I appreciate it. So we're going to turn up one time, and then I'm going to let y'all review my sources. Black power
The black is for the gods, melanated and elevated, holding the main charge. Black African Power, it's your boy, Black Panther from the Mossi Warrior Clan and Amaran Squad. Check this out, family. Just did this video so people will know who we are, man. I got an exciting team that's out. We're pushing solutions in the community. You know, it's something that I always wanted to put together. We got my man Nahisi, you know, bringing that science net and net with the linguistics, fortune favor with the music and the solutions in the community. Saint Kofa from the House of Consciousness, bringing that realness to balance us out. And he's also coming out with that Mossi Warrior Clan workout program. Him and Heru Sarah Moon, look out for that. Other than that, man, we got Class of Shabazz, expert in Moorish history. Amin Ma'at Ra already got 3 books out, destroying the Christianity thing from a Roman perspective.
4 now. He got 4 books now.
God Killer rolling with me as always. Shout out to Pit Boss, who did our logo and this video. Before this video, you know, the intro that y'all saw. So if y'all want, you know, something like that, holla at Pit Boss, Digital Pit Boss Entertainment. Holla at me and I'll get you that contact. We also got to give it up to Tyre RBG, my comrade that did the music for the video. So I believe it's TyreRBG.com. Hit him up. And, you know, the brother's talented. You can get his album, Hymns of the Whirlwind, Pan-African music all day. So, you know, we just want to do this video to name the members of Mossi Warrior Clan and let y'all know that, you know, expect high scholarship, expect high science, expect culture, expect solutions, and expect practical applications that you can put into your life and solve some problems. And we're going to be keeping it African, man. You know how we do. So that's all I got, man. Short little video. Black Panther, Mossi Warrior Clan. Spears is flying. Pseudos is crying. I'm out.
And here are my references. You can pause the video if you like. You can write them down. Inside of one of my references, a couple of my references, there were chroniclers involved, which gave me key information to be able to put this presentation together because I can let it speak for itself. Because it is the chroniclers that allow us firsthand information that dealt with what happened when these people entered into West Africa. That's why I titled the presentation the way that I actually did. Picture references. So the imageries that I used, these are from the links. These links is where I got the pictures from. Now remember, I did not cover all 5 of the things that Prince Henry set out to do, because over time, some things transpired which slowed the progress of some things. They found out the trade routes when they conquered Morocco. They knew where the gold was at. That allowed Portuguese, like Jehudi said and I said earlier, to penetrate further down the coastlines. So they found the routes, they got the gold, okay? They were finding out how to get to India. That leads to, I covered one primarily. I mentioned the other one by name. Prester John, the man, the myth, the legend. Will the Portuguese find Prester John? Or the kingdom of Prester John? We may just find out. Or we may not. Because, you know, really, that's what they tell us they were for Prester John. But in the end, you were jack moving. Even after you signed a treaty to state that you would no longer be kidnapping Africans. You reneged and went against your word. And then you put the Africans in a predicament where the economy was slave-based. So the only way that the other Africans could survive and be able to defend themselves and or to protect their tribes was to sell off captives, which would push people into further holes against one another. Some were very willing traders, others were not. You had people scrambling all over the continent trying to run away from you as you penetrated the coastline of West Africa. That's why I said you got to start in Senegal, because the whole plot around that particular area was damaging. It started with the Portuguese, and I'm only in the 1500s. I haven't even gotten to the 1600s. And I went through pieces of the 1400s. Over a 30 or 40-year span, almost 50-year span. And we still have not found Prester John in the little areas that I actually covered. So we still got time to see if we can find Prester John or the kingdom of Prester John. Because I didn't cover that. And I didn't cover Columbus intentionally. So man, I tried to make this video real quick. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Right. Or Zora. Yeah, it's Zurara. Yeah, he's a primary chronicler. He documented this very well. Judy, I think you might have came in late. I went through him already. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. Any questions, I feel free to answer. For those that said the slave trade never happened, we're going to see if that is true. We're going to see why so much was focused on carving up the continent of Africa. The age of discovery, demarcation. Come on, man. If we were already in this land or in the Caribbean or in South America, that means we were already cultivating in those areas, which means we were already living. We had to have some form of way to survive in those areas, which means we were already advanced in agriculture. Why we don't have that until arriving in there and then we set up shop? You don't have that. And how dare you disrespect our ancestors by assuming to claim a place that wasn't nothing, not even 800 years ago. No disrespect to the who we call Native Americans, the Indians, accidentally called the Indians, but wasn't nothing here. They didn't offer anything to the rest of the world to want to claim. Now, if you want to get a little bit more information on anything dealing in the regards of the kidnapping trade or slave ships or shipping companies that advance things, I've actually already done presentations on those. Again, Classes of Breads dropped an excellent presentation today on Mansa Musa. Inside of that presentation, he deals with a primary. He brings out some stuff that you not heard of. He brought out something that came from one of our great elders, who a lot of people seem to cling on to this particular elder's research and regurgitate it. And what he brought out was so vital that it made sense when he brought it out where the story come from. Because going back to my research, that is exactly what this thing turned all the way back around. And he give you the primaries on it. So indigenous people, we see you. And to the sister that sent me all of this craziness about being indigenous and wanted to argue with me about it, shame on you. And with that being said, Shimon Hotep, go in peace. Remember to keep Sister Patrice in your prayers. She's gonna need them. Hopefully everything cool, but she will need your prayers regardless. And thank you for tuning in. I'm out.